which today is honored to open its door once again to celebrate the 76th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, together with Friends of Socialist China, as well as representatives of Solidarity from and diplomatic corps and of brotherly nations present here. Allow me to begin not only for thanking for the invitation, but also by expressing our sincere gratitude to Friends of Socialist China for choosing Bolivar Hall once more as the venue of this important gathering. Your presence in this space, which bears the name of our liberator, Simón Bolívar, is deeply meaningful. It unites the memory of the struggles for independence with today's commitment to building a fairer, more supportive and multipolar world. We also wish to give special thanks to the embassies of the People's Democratic Republic of Laos, People's Republic of China, Russian Federation, and the Republic of Cuba, as well as to the solidarity movements whose steadfast commitments accompanies us in the defense of sovereignty, the self-determination of peoples, and the respect for international law. Your support and friendships stand as testimony that our causes are shared and that international cooperation founded on mutual respect is not only possible but essential. Dear comrades, in this year we mark both the 76th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China and the 80th anniversary of the victory over fascism. We must remember the millions of men and women who gave their lives in the struggle against imperialist barbarism. That achievement was more than a military triumph. It represented the affirmation of dignity of all humanity and the birth of a new hope. The brave Chinese people rose from the ruins and, through sacrifice, wrote one of the most glorious chapters in world history. Venezuela recognizes in that epic struggle the spiritual strength that continues to inspire the Chinese Revolution today, a beacon of sovereignty and social justice for its people and for the whole world. The People's Republic of China, with its renewed and robust global leadership, now puts forward proposals of great meaning and potential for humanity, such as the Global Governance Initiative presented by President Xi Jinping at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit held in Tianjin this year. This new international project complements the three initiatives previously advanced by China: the Global Development Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, and the Global Security Initiative. Together, they point towards building a community of shared future for mankind, in full harmony with Venezuela's Bolivarian diplomacy of peace, and with a vision of a balanced world order based on the sovereign equality of states, respect for international law, genuine multilateralism, and a focus on well-being of peoples. Brothers and sisters, it is a source of pride for me to highlight that this year also marks 2 years since the establishment of the all-weather and all-round strategic partnership between Venezuela and China. Over these 2 years, China and Venezuela have strengthened an exemplary alliance founded on mutual trust, unwavering respect for sovereignty, and a shared vision of a fairer and multipolar world. The bonds of brotherhood between our nations have shown resilience in the face of global challenges, demonstrating that joint projects rooted in sincere cooperation and complementarity generate significant tangible benefits. In this context, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reaffirms its steadfast commitment to working alongside the People's Republic of China to advance toward an even deeper bilateral relation, expanding contacts among communities, governments, political parties, parliaments, and academic institutions and businesses. Venezuela also extends its gratitude to the government and people of China for their valuable and unconditional support in the face of constant aggression by hegemonic powers, which seek to avoid the inevitable decline of their global dominance, pursue an aggressive multidimensional war against nations that refuse to submit to their dictates. In our country, the clear messages of support and solidarity from Beijing are received with open arms, particularly in relation to Venezuela's efforts to preserve peace and security in our Caribbean region, and especially in response to the recent hostile and illegal actions of the United States government, which threaten peace, security, and stability on the entire region. President Nicolás Maduro's commitment is clear. We must continue to strengthen regional unity in the face of external threats and persist in the genuine fight against drug trafficking, organized crime, and all the scourges that afflict our societies, calling for a regional cooperation within the framework of international law. Finally, in this context, when as a nation, as a region, we face multiple and complex challenges such as unilateralism and interventionism, that China has consolidated itself as a true friend and a beacon of light for sovereign peoples and governments that still struggle for full independence. Today, through its clear international leadership, China offers us a pathway of progress, cooperation, and development in a world where traditional hegemonic powers seek to impose their will on our people through violence, imperialism, and a supremacist and racist vision. Therefore, on this 76th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, the people and government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reiterate their profound gratitude and fraternity with the people and government of China. At the same time, we reaffirm that our doors remain wide open for the deepening of all mutually beneficial cooperation between China and Venezuela, as well as with the whole of Latin America, in every possible sphere, broadening it beyond our strategic and political and energy partnership towards the development of all areas of exchange and investment. In doing so, we aim to contribute to the well-being of our peoples, the development of both nations, and the creation of collective strengths to build a more just, inclusive, peaceful, and equitable multipolar world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councillor Hernandez Maya. I think that what you have said reminds us, of course, of the grave threat that Venezuela is facing today, which is part of the chaos being fomented by the United States, but it is taking particularly militaristic forms vis-a-vis Venezuela. And that is where, of course, solidarity between all the countries that oppose US militarism, hegemonism, etc., is going to be such an important resource. Thank you very much again. We will now go to, we have three more speakers, and I should say we're not exactly sure whether Mr. George Galloway is going to show up, but we are going to wait and see what happens, but we have two speakers before then. So we will go to, first to Mr. Thavon Singaraj, Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of the Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Thank you, comrades, moderators, comrades and friends. It is a privilege for me to be here with you all together, like a comrades here. And I would also like to thank Kees Bennett for giving me this opportunity for me. This is my first time to join. And as you may know, this year is the 76th anniversary of the founding of the Republic of China. And while I'm taking the floor, I'd like to express my congratulations and appreciation for the successful hosting of 25th Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and the commemoration marking 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War, of the resistance against Japanese aggression, and the World Anti-Fascist War held earlier this month. And these two historic events organized by the party and the state of China are considered to be elevated the role of the Communist Party of China and the People's Republic of China on the international stage, showing the world community the strength and the growth of the people of China. amidst the complex changes and regional and international situation in recent years. I would also like to congratulate the outstanding achievement that the party, the state, and the people of China have achieved over the leadership of the Communist Party of China, with the General Secretary and President Xi Jinping at the core, especially the implementation of the resolution of the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China and the 14th Five-Year Plan for Socio-Economic Development of Chinese government, just to name some. And as you may know, back to 25th April 1961, Laos and China established the diplomatic relation, and this year marking 64th anniversary of diplomatic relation of our two countries. Since then, our bilateral relation and cooperation have gradually enhanced from strength to strength. Our two nations have stood side by side through the time of struggle and currently working together to advancing socialist development and prosperity. The latest visit to China by His Excellency Thongloun Sisoulith, the General Secretary of the Lao People Revolutionary Party and the President of the Lao PDR on 4th to 6th September, has brought our bilateral relation into a greater height. Our two nations have signed a total of 11 important documents, which is to chart out our future direction. Our two leaders reaffirmed the commitment to work together and also agreed to focus on the operation of the China Railway and the development along the route to upgrade the key projects, for example, defense, law enforcement and security, and other fields. In addition, both sides value that the Lao-China or China-Laos relationship is now at the best of the history and work together to implement the new shared future master plan 2024 to 2028 and pledged to accelerate its implementation for even greater success, which has laid a strong foundation for the cooperation across the multiple sectors. To date, China is the largest investor and major trading partner. In 2024, the value of our bilateral trade reached a record of $8 billion, an increase of 15.9% in the previous year. Among the key achievements, the Lao-China Railway has become a flagship symbol of the partnership, transporting more than 50 million passengers since coming into service. The railway has transformed the Laos country from the landlocked country into land-linked hub, connecting it with our neighbor country like Thailand, Singapore, and beyond. This increased connectivity has boosted tourism, trade, economic growth, people-to-people exchanges. Comrades and friends, as you may know, the Lao-China Economic Corridor is a major infrastructure and economic development initiative linked to our two countries as a crucial part of overall Belt and Road Initiative, aiming at enhancing cargo transported since the inception in December 2021. At the heart of the China and Lao Economic Corridor lies the China-Laos Railway, a flagship of $6 billion under the BRI, and the 1,035 kilometers railway connects Kunming in China, Yunnan province to the Lao capital Vientiane, and serve as a physical and strategic backbone for the economic development across the region. Since its launches in December 2021, the railway has only redefined regional logistics but also become a vital artery and of the emerging Lao-China economic corridor. So comrades and friends, I'm very happy to see that the traditional friendship between Laos and China is at its best in the history of the relation between our two nations. The establishment of the partnership of shared future between our two countries has been actively implemented and has yielded tangible results. The two countries continue to have close political and security cooperation and high-level political trust, which is an important foundation for the promoting the deepening of economic and trade cooperation and bringing the tangible result to our two people. In terms of party cooperation, this year is the final year of the implementation of the 2021 and 2025 Inter-Party Cooperation Plan and the Inter-Party Personnel Training Cooperation Plan, which two sides have jointly implemented in a great success. Both sides have agreed to renew the plan for next 5 years. Comrades and friends, as you may know, Laos is only the only landlocked country in Southeast Asia and one of the existing communist countries. Despite many difficulties, under the comprehensive leadership of the Lao People Revolutionary Party, the Lao PDR, or Laos, you may know, has been able to ensure political stability and the national security, and people enjoy basic social peace and continuously grow the economy and gradually improve the people's living standard. At present, Laos is now focusing on the implementation of the solution of the 11th the National Congress in the final stage and preparing for this upcoming National Congress, this 12th one, that will be held earlier next year. More importantly, this year marked a jubilee, a golden jubilee of Laos. One is the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Lao Revolutionary Party and 50th anniversary of our Independence Days. And my final point, as this is the first time that I join, and I think that you will get a chance to know about Laos more, and I'm ready to work with you if you need more. Finally, I wish to thank Keith Bennett for make this happen together with your able team for your tireless work. And may I wish all comrades, friends, and distinguished guests good luck, good health, and greater success in your noble task and undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singaraj. That was also a very important and timely reminder of the potential for solidarity between socialist countries, between countries that oppose imperialism, and support development, security, and fair means of global governance. So that was really very good. Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Zhang Weiwei. This will be, his speech will take the form of a video since he's not present at the moment here with us. So please, go ahead. Professor Zhang Weiwei is author and professor of international relations at Fudan University.
Dear comrades and friends, on the occasion of the 76th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, I wish to extend my warm greetings to all of you on the convening of Socialist China Conference in London. Indeed, for over 76 years, under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, Socialist China has overcome unimaginable challenges of all sorts and become the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity since 2014, with the world's largest industrial and manufacturing power and lifted over 800 million people out of abject poverty and created the world's largest middle class. Today, China also has a life expectancy higher than the United States, with a per capita consumption of protein and vegetables also higher than the United States. Aside from these economic and social achievements, China has also become a science and technology superpower. According to a recent report of the ASPI, China leads the United States in 57 out of 64 critical technologies. Militarily, China has also built up a powerful defense capability. In United States Secretary of Defense Hex's words, China's missile system can sink all U.S. aircraft carriers within 20 minutes. Ideologically, China's rise represents the rise of a civilizational state, an amalgam of the world's longest continuous civilization and super-large modern socialist state, with deep-rooted belief in one humanity rather than on the table or in the menu, in peaceful coexistence and winning cooperation of all nations rather than zero-sum game, and unite and prosper rather than divide and rule. With all this, China is forever different, and the world is forever different, and the world cause of socialism is forever different. Whatever challenges ahead, China will overcome. Let's work together to vigorously promote global peace and development, the great cause of socialism, and a more just, fair, democratic, and peaceful multipolar world order to come. Again, my hearty congratulations to all of you for the success of your conference. Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, some very important and timely reminders from Professor Zhang Weiwei. I think with that, we will bring this first opening panel to a close. I'd like to thank all the speakers once again for their extremely thoughtful and enlightening speeches. And we will now go without a break to the next panel, which will be chaired by Francisco Dominguez. Where are you, Francisco? There you are. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It was a great speech, by the way.
Thank you.
Everyone, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Most of my chops here, but that's here. You're probably on a big time.
Upcoming days.
Yeah, the audio is fine, right? Yeah. After yeah. We just need this to stay in front of these. Yeah, so we just about to talk. Yeah. You can go. Let's go. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's going better. If I can loosen this. You need this? Also, this is new.
So,
Who set this up? That's better. Russ.
yeah,
So I've extended it there,
yeah,
and I've put it back up, so it should stay up now.
okay. So we're going to move it back a little bit anyway. My comrade, be gentle with me as usual.
Sit down.
Okay, yeah. So about this is a good distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Can you hear well? Yeah.
If you can make sure, Francisco, when you and the other speakers speak, make sure you don't move too much in front of the microphone.
I won't touch it.
Just Oh yeah, but just make sure you don't like turn around or anything. Just stay right in front of them. Yeah.
Can it be? Yeah. Can we hear it? Yeah.
Yep. That's yours, dear
Thank you.
Professor.
Is it vodka? Is it vodka?
Of course.
Hey.
You don't have an extra.
See, the lecture. No.
Okay, let's call people to order and make a start. So first thing will be the video, yeah, from Mick Wallace. First thing is the video from Mick Wallace.
This is the order, right?
How are you doing?
All right, nice to see you. Are you?
Not too stressed.
Oh, well, prepared to fight.
Just here to meet Francis. Do I have to see that? Nice and chummy.
Can comrades please sit down? We need to continue with the celebrations. Thank you for taking back to your seats. It's
We had 5 million people on.
so, there's no guarantee.
Not looking so good today.
Thank you for taking back your seats, comrades. Keith. Doctor. Professor, you okay?
Hi, Professor.
I was the doctor, you're the doctor.
The doctor needs a
A prescription. Thank you very much. We're going to continue this. My name is Francisco Dominguez. I'm the member of the committee of the Friends of Socialist China, but I'm also member of National Secretary of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. I thought it was censorship. And I'm involved in several Latin American campaigns. I'm a specialist on the contemporary political economy of Latin America. I'm going to be sharing this session of the celebration and have a very distinguished panel who shall introduce in a minute. What I want to do is to give a sort of panoramic. The title of the session is 80 Years Since the Defeat of Fascism, China as a Force for Peace and Multipolarity. If you look at the history of China, you will understand, or you understand why China is a force of peace. What they went through, which I'll cover panoramically, will answer this particular point. And multipolarity, China is clearly a force of multipolarity, is an indication of China's desire to actually ensure that the global South plays a protagonic role in international affairs by making a better world, by taking them out of the situation of misery, oppression, and exploitation that imperialism subject them to. So I'll go to this panoramic. From the 19th century until 1949, China suffered the following calamities. 1894 to 1895, the first Sino-Japanese War. 1907 to 1911, revolution and fall of the Qing dynasty, which created a lot of problems and cruelty as well as violence. 1911 to 1913, the destructive role of the plague of warlords. 1927, the Kuomintang launches the first military offensive against the communists, and this led to 100,000 communists being slaughtered, and the White Terror that was launched afterwards, it is estimated that possibly 600,000 or more people actually were assassinated. 1931 to 1934, Japan's military occupation of Manchukuo, and Japan proclaimed the right to domain the whole of China. In other words, this World War in China began in 1931. 1934 to 1935, Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang, launched the second offensive against the communists, leading to the 10,000 kilometers long march. Between 1935 and 1937, the Japanese expanded their military occupation of most of China's major cities, with horrible consequences in every single one of them. In 1937, the Japanese occupation of Nanjing led to the massacre in a few days, perhaps a couple of weeks, to something like 370,000 Chinese civilians, and the rape of thousands of women under the specific orders of Japanese commander Matsui Iwane. Between 1937 and 1945 was the continuation of Japanese expansion into Chinese territory. 1931 to 1945, the national resistance war against the Japanese invasion continued, and between 1945 and 1949, there was the civil war after Japanese were defeated between the Communist Party led by Mao Zedong and the Kuomintang led by Chiang Kai-shek. In 1949, this ended with the victory of the Chinese Revolution. In 1950, there was the Korean War, and I stop there in terms of the what China went through. So it is estimated, and these figures are very imprecise, depending on how many sources you consult, you get different figures, they're all very high. Between 1900 and 1949, the number of civilian deaths, or the number of deaths that China underwent in that period is in the region of 50 million to 100 million, depending on what you consult. You can imagine that's a real horrible catastrophe. So China not only suffered that, but it suffered, what Mao Zedong called the century of humiliation. But it began before with the evolution of the opium trade. Just to give you an idea how fast and how rapidly the opium trade expanded into China, between 1729, in 1729, China imported 200 chests, which is boxes of 60 kilograms of opium per year. In 1767, this had gone to 1,000 chests a year. By 1820 to 1830, it had gone up to 10,000 chests a year. By 1838 onwards, it had gone up to 40,000 a year, and from 1858 onwards, it's gone up to 70,000 per year. So this was forced by military means, the addiction of millions and millions of Chinese to consume opium in order to improve the trade deficit of Great Britain. This was all organized around what is known as the unequal treaties. Just to give you a very short, sketchy version of them, there is the one in 1842 in Nanjing, which led to the cession, that is to say, China have to give up Hong Kong. They have to pay $6 million silver dollars as compensation, $3 million silver dollars to pay the debt, and then $12 million of silver dollars for the cost of the war. Imagine, Britain and others invaded China militarily, and China has to pay for the cost of the military operation. This is just incredible. In 1858, there was the Tianjin Treaty that legalized the trade of opium throughout the country, and they forced, obviously, compensation for the military expenditure, and this went as follows: 4 million silver taels to Britain, 2 million silver taels to France. This treaty was updated in 1860 to 8 million taels to Britain, silver taels to Britain, and 8 million taels to France. So, just to give you an idea of the horrible underdevelopment of China, between 1850 and 1860 alone, about 400 million silver taels left China, leaving China's financial system in the hands of the Western occupiers, particularly Britain. And then China had to give poor concessions, that is to say, territorial concessions of chunks of its territory to the Western power that occupied them, where they had military, administrative, financial control. By 1880, the number of the poor concessions, particularly poor cities, was only 34. By 1920, these poor concessions had gone up to 60. That is to say, by 1920, China had no national sovereignty almost whatsoever. And then all of this led to poverty. That's why China is very much in favor of peace, but also why it's so much in favor of improving the situation of the third world, of the global south. In 1800, between 75 to 80% of China's population lived in extreme poverty. By 1900, this has gone up to 80 to 85%. In 1949, the rate of extreme poverty had gone up to between 85 to 90. That is to say, it's getting worse and worse and worse every year. In 1900, life expectancy in China was between 24 to 32 years. In 1900, 1/3 of children died before their first year, and only half made it to adulthood. Since the 17th century, China had been hit by regular famines, epidemics, and infectious diseases: cholera, smallpox, typhoid, malaria, and more. In 1949, the year of the revolution, life expectancy was 35 years old. 80% illiteracy, and only 20% of the children actually received education. That is what imperialism did to China in that century. So, how did China recover? Between 1949 and 1976, the year Mao Zedong died, life expectancy went from 35 to 64 years. That is to say, massive improvement. The population between 1949 and 1976 grew from 400 million to nearly 900 million, indicating the improvement in the quality of life of people, and still many of them living in poverty. By 1980, despite all of this, 80% of the population was living in extreme poverty, and by 1990 it was still over 70%. Between 1990 and 2021, it went down to zero. That's extraordinary. That is to say, in something like 30 years, China was able to take more than 800 million, it's been repeated here many times, more than 800,000 people, 800 million people, I beg your pardon, out of poverty. So the final point I want to make is regarding how China has impacted, which our speakers are going to comment in more detail, the trade between China and the global south between 2000 and 2024. China and ASEAN, that is to say, the countries that belong to Asia is Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. There is more in Asia, but it will give you an idea how much expanded. In 2000, the total trade between China and the Asian countries was 39 billion. By 2024, it's gone up to 419 billion. China and Africa, in 2000, the total trade between China and Africa was 10 billion. By 2024, it's gone up to 179 billion. And China and Latin America in 2000 was 14 billion, that is to say very little, and by By 2024, it's gone up to 982 billion. That is to say, these relations, that is to say, the relations between the developed China and the global south have involved the following: credit, investment, technology, and market, which massively, and is still going on, massively improve the life of millions and millions of people in the global south, which is the majority of humanity. This has also involved development of infrastructure works, motorways, ports, trains, all sorts of facilities and so on, technological transfer, development of renewables, digitalization, and a special mention deserves the creation of a green belt in Africa, in the Sahel, which is 15 kilometers wide and 775 kilometers long, which goes all the way from Djibouti all the way to Dakar, which is as a result of the experience of China's fight against anti-desertification in its own country, which is actually now bringing into Africa. So I leave it there for people to realize that this is the panoramic where things really start, by 2024, China is a major force politically, economically, and in every possible way to improve the life of the majority of humanity. Thank you very much, Aline. I want to learn Chinese myself. Our first speaker is Mick Wallace, who is a former MP. We are going to have a video from him, former MEP. He's a former member of Parliament in Ireland for Wexford between 2011 and 2019. He is a former member of the South constituency of the European Parliament from 1914 to 1919, and is member of the group of European United Left and Northern Left from 2019 to 2024, member of the Independence for Change in Ireland in the European Parliament. He formed part of many committees, Foreign Affairs, Security and Defense, and he is a strong Latin American, and I know because I met him personally. He speaks perfect Spanish. And I did some research in the internet, and he says a controversial figure known for his public praise of the Chinese government. And even worse or better, Wallace has repeatedly asserted that Taiwan is part of China. Could you say Mick Wallace?
Hello everyone, how's it going? Sorry I am not in London with you, which I had planned, but it wasn't to be. But anyway, sure, I'm here to say hello. I hope all good. I understand that your discussion is mostly around China's achievement in tackling extreme poverty and building socialism. And China as a force for peace and multipolarity. Well, I suppose just before we discuss the concept of multipolarity and multilateralism and unipolarity, I just want to touch on the fact that we're living in incredibly dangerous times. The world time, such instability, such absence of international law of any form. But it's not just a time of danger and instability, it's also a time of opportunity, and I think China can be at the heart of that opportunity. Now, the things that have gone on in the last couple of years alone are scary. Even before that, in the last 25 years, I think American imperialism has become more aggressive and more blatantly ugly and abusive, with the Afghan war, Iraq war, Libya, the dirty war in Syria, the the goings on in Ukraine, and now we're looking at Palestine. And this is not to even touch on terrible things happening in other places like Latin America and Africa. I mean, only in the last few weeks, the Trump administration bombed a boat out of the water off Venezuela, claiming that it was the movement of drugs, when in actual fact it was just migrants struggling to make a living somewhere else. I mean, just a total abuse of international law. But we've seen Israel, with US and European support, violate international law every day, not just in Palestine, not just in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iran, in Syria, in Qatar. There's no end to it. And we don't even hear the international community or the Europeans even raise an objection to what Israel is doing. I mean, we're living in scary times. But look at, I suppose, much of the dialogue around these issues has been framed traditionally by the West in a way to suit themselves, and they've been very good at propagandizing their position at the expense of others. And like, for example, they still love to describe China as being authoritarian, which really is an Orientalist position and doesn't bear up to scrutiny. Which links to the whole concept of what is democracy, and what in the West it seems to be about civic rights, the right to vote, freedom of expression, whereas in China freedom is about the freedom from deprivation, from extreme poverty, from hierarchies. And I mean, you know, we can argue till the cows come home about who has the right perspective and who's right and who's wrong. And, you know, it's very hard to say who is right and who's wrong. But what is clear is that the manner in which the West has tried to portray this for so many years is basically inaccurate. But just going back to the point about multilateralism, multipolarity, I mean, I was looking at the definitions of the words, right? Multipolarity is defined as a global power structure in which power and influence are distributed among different countries. Unipolarity is obviously a power structure where a single state holds predominant military, economic, and cultural influence, overshadowing all others. In other words, if you don't like, if you don't see things our way, and if you don't like it, well, you're wrong. And that's the arrogant position of colonialism, and it's the arrogant position of Western imperialism. And the unipolarity has existed with the US, the dominant force, but this is completely and always linked to imperialism, which cannot possibly be good. It's about abusing others for your own financial benefit, and needs to be fought tooth and nail at every turn. But I heard Vijay Prashad recently talk about China and multipolarity and multilateralism, and he said that China is much more about multilateralism, he says, rather than multipolarity. And just to give you the definition of multilateralism, it's an alliance of countries pursuing a common goal. Multilateralism is based on the principles of inclusivity, equality, and cooperation, and aims to foster a more peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. And in fairness to the Chinese, they've done great work in this area, and I suppose it kind of started more after the 2008 financial crisis, when the wheels came off for the capitalist system, on a temporary basis anyway. It didn't lead to the death of capitalism, unfortunately, but it certainly dealt it a serious blow, and they've probably been lying through that position ever since. But after the 2008 financial crisis, China did look to developing more South-South trade relations and business with all these other people that they felt they could build a more healthy relationship with, right? And I suppose it's important to say that China has probably overtaken the US and Europe in the area of science and technology at this stage, and that's why they've been threatened by the US, and with Europeans forever threatened to de-link from China as if they're a threat to them, just because we're very much, the Europeans are very much puppets of US empire at this stage and don't really have an independent foreign policy anyway. But this is what the US do, and I can remember back in the 80s and 90s when Japan were on the rise. The Americans put them back in their box with the Plaza Accord, and then you had the reverse Plaza in '95 when Clinton was in power. They literally put the Japanese down, but the Chinese are not really for putting down, and they don't seem to have any great appetite to return to the century of humiliation. That probably began around 1838 with the first Anglo-Opium War. I mean, the century of humiliation for China was really about colonial aggression against China that led to the death of millions. And it was a terrible century for China. And China certainly has no appetite to go back there. And China is very much a serious force in the world economically today. But for me, just as importantly, I think that they can be a much more positive influence in the world, and I think that their work towards multilateralism will bear fruit. Now, obviously, they obviously changed position after the financial crisis, but then in 2013 they introduced the Belt and Road Initiative, which is also about opening up links around infrastructure and development with about 150 countries. A fantastic initiative. So, I mean, at the time, when it's so obvious that Western imperialism, mostly driven by America and the old Europeans tagging along, their days are numbered, and we've really had enough of them. They have destroyed millions of lives and displaced tens of millions in the last 25 years alone, and it's not where we want to be, and things have to change. And Xi Jinping is very keen on the importance of countries having their sovereignty and working together for peace. And this has been, the way of China. I mean, people should remember, China hasn't dropped a bomb on anybody in 45 years. And the Americans drop bombs on people every day. The Americans have dropped more bombs since the end of the Second World War than the rest of the world put together. They have been an incredible destructive force. And I like to think that China offers a very positive alternative. People will say, well, we've never seen a nice empire. But you know what? And I'm not disagreeing with that. All governments leave a lot to be desired. But there's something positive about where the Chinese are going with their position. And they do have a policy of not interfering in the affairs of other countries. They work for mutual benefit for themselves and for the country they're dealing with. One thing I would say is that while I never expected them to interfere in Gaza, I do think that it has been remiss of them not to cut off business links with Israel. I'm not asking them to bomb the place. I don't want to ever bomb anywhere. But we're watching a genocide. And this, I know people say, well, look, if you cut off links with one country, where do you draw the line? And there's some merit in that. I mean, America has probably been the most destructive force in the last 100 years, so why do business with them? But listen, I just think that in this case, it's a bit different even. It's a genocide. I don't think, I mean, Israel is a terrorist state, and it's so obvious, and it's just, they are so bad. I do think that China will show a wonderful example if they cut off business links with them. Anyway, that's my few words. Thanks, bye-bye.
Thank you very much for Dominic. He's absolutely right. Multipolarity offers opportunities. There's no question about it. But the one country, as Mick said, which is the source of aggression and instability is the United States. Let me give you just one example very briefly. Trump threatened Panama with taking the canal by military means. And the government of Panama panicked, naturally. And then, as a result of negotiations, Molinos, the president, capitulated completely. And he was forced by the United States to abandon any relationship that he had with China, the BRI, and BRICS. Completely withdrawn. And China respected that because it's a decision by the Panamanian government, even though he didn't like it. Can you imagine the equivalent, the opposite way? Was a country actually wanted to do business with China, and as a result, the United States, had to break or reduce its relationship with the United States. The United States will never accept it. In terms of finally, on this particular point, on what Mick said, there is a very intense demonization of China, which is toxic. It's really toxic. It's very intense. It takes place every minute of the day, everywhere in the world. This is quite important to know. So for information, in case people want to have a balanced view, a different view, an alternative view, I want to advise and suggest that people read the Global Times, China Daily, and Xinhua News, because you get the other side of the story. Our next speaker, I don't think in his presentation, but I'm going to do a presentation all the same. This is Keith Bennett, great comrade. He's a specialist in international relations, co-editor of Friends of Socialist China. He studied Chinese history and politics at SOAS University of London, and on graduating, began a lifetime of working with China at the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding in 1979. He has visited China regularly since 1981, and is also deputy chairman of the 48 Group Club, bless you, whose July 1953 icebreaker mission was the first Western trade delegation to the People's Republic. Keith makes regular contributions on development related to China in many media in the UK as well as internationally. Keith.
Thank you very much, Francisco, and thank you to everyone who's here today. It's great to see so many friends and comrades here. It's really a pleasure, and thank you all for coming. Now, this session is devoted to the theme of 80 years since the defeat of fascism, China as a force for peace and multipolarity. And I was very privileged, and as was my fellow panelist, Jenny, who will speak a little bit later after me, to witness some of that history actually being made before our eyes on September the 3rd this year at the magnificent commemoration that was held in Beijing. My day began with the wake-up call at 4:20 in the morning to get ready, but I took some pleasure from the Sky News complaining that they'd had to be in the square by 11 o'clock the previous night. Now, that occasion was immediately preceded by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Shenzhen, which our comrade from the Lao People's Democratic Republic in particular mentioned. But these two things, as I'll aim to show, have to be seen in conjunction with one another and as part of what I would describe as an ongoing and rapidly developing realignment of international politics today. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization was the first international organization initiated by China, and of course it's named after a Chinese city. The gathering in Tianjin this year is the biggest event that it's held in its quarter-century history. The organization started out as the Shanghai Five, and the members were China, with China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And its initial function was to settle the border disputes that had been left over from history. People say that they were left over from the time of the Soviet Union. It would be more accurate to say that they were actually left over from the time of Tsarist Russia. The organization took its form of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization when Uzbekistan also joined. Amongst the other participants, Turkmenistan is constitutionally a permanently neutral country, so has a status of guest, but the Turkmenistan head of state has attended all the summits since 1995. When the organization was joined as full members by India, Pakistan, and Iran and Belarus, that gave it 10 full members. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization now has 27 members of its family, as it's called, with the addition of Laos this year as the new partner. Those members come from Asia mostly, but also from Europe and Africa. The summit streamlined the organization, with the former categories of observer countries and dialogue partners being merged into a single category of SCO partners. Having started by resolving border issues, it took up mostly security-related issues, but's now expanded to a whole range of issues, especially economic and people-to-people. At Tianjin, the leaders agreed to set up an SCO development bank, something that was first proposed by China a decade ago and has now been finally agreed. The Tianjin declaration from the summit is 6,000 words long, which indicates the range of issues that it addressed. Now, representing about half the world, this meeting was attended by around 20 heads of state and government. Notable among them was the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, making his first visit to China in 7 years, which was prefigured by his meeting with Xi Jinping in Kazan in Russia at the previous year's summit. And this really, this is also, of course, related to India's relations with the United States, where Trump's imposition of tariffs, its insults to India regarding its economy, and his general threats related to India's energy imports from Russia and his pressure on the European Union to follow suit have effectively upended about a quarter century of US policy, which has been to try and divide India and China. Now, the developments of the SCO also have to be seen in conjunction with those of BRICS, which is another major international body largely initiated by China some years later, with its first summit in 2009. BRICS also now has 10 full members, with Indonesia joining in January, and currently has another 10 partner countries. These numbers are almost definitely going to increase, as some 40 countries in all have expressed varying degrees of interest in becoming BRICS Plus members or partners. Trump, of course, has been attacking all the key BRICS members. China and Russia, most people will know about. I've just mentioned India. Similarly, he's launched recently very strong attacks on both Brazil and South Africa. In the case of Brazil, rallying to the defense of his fellow fascist Bolsonaro and shamelessly interfering in Brazil's internal affairs. And in the case of South Africa, promoting a racist and utterly baseless narrative of so-called white genocide. Now, behind these pretexts, although they themselves certainly reflect and embody Trump's own racist and fascist mentality, lies the question of these countries' relations with Russia and China, and not least the courageous lead taken by South Africa in leading the international legal charge against Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. What the result, of course, of Trump's meddling has been, as the saying might go, to make BRICS great again as they rediscover their common situation, tasks, and development needs. So we have here an emerging, interlocking, overlapping pattern with BRICS and SCO and China at the centre. This summit, which took place on August the 31st to September 1st, was of course immediately followed by the September 3rd commemorations in Beijing, attended by 26 heads of state and government. Of course, a number of them attended both events, but by no means all. One of the things that attracted a huge amount of attention in the West, of course, was the optics of Presidents Xi and Putin and Kim Jong-un of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea standing side by side as the three principal people at the commemoration. And this was presented over here as some kind of snub to the West, and maybe it partly was. But this is also, I would say, this presentation is also a reflection of what I would call imperialist narcissism, in that the Western countries, the imperialist powers, are not the centre of the world, and not everything is done simply in response to them. China and the USSR, as Timofey was pointing out, were the two key protagonists on the main fronts of World War II. I'm going to summarise, finish up. I was struck by a comment made by the very well-known CGTN presenter Li Jingjing when she said that, reviewing who was there on September the 3rd, she said the United States accuses us of quarrelling with all our neighbours, but all our neighbours were here celebrating together with us. And I would say just contrast that with the situation of the United States, particularly under the present administration, with Trump's threats to annex Canada, to its dispute with another NATO member, Denmark, over Greenland, and its shameless threats against Venezuela and the bombing of Venezuelan vessels in the Caribbean in total violation of any pretense of international law. The comment was also made about the absence of the Western powers from the events in Beijing, and there's a simple reason why they were absent. That's because they chose to be. They may have wanted in this way to show China's isolation, but they succeeded in the opposite. It's like the famous newspaper headline. I'm not sure if it's apocryphal or not, but there's an old saying that there was a headline in a daily newspaper in England with the headline, "Fog in Channel, Continent Isolated." And it's a particular kind, I would say, of imperialist conceit and hubris to refuse invitations and then complain about who was there. But who was there and who was not there, I would say, indeed tells a story, namely that the fundamental division of the world analysed by Lenin at the formation of the Communist International into oppressor and oppressed nations remains valid, but that today, without minimising the continued power of imperialism, the prevalence of neo-colonialism, the contradictory and often tenuous nature of the emerging United Front, the long-oppressed global majority is starting to take its destiny in its own hands, build new societies, and restructure international relations in keeping with the new and emerging realities. And China is at the centre of this process, driving what Xi Jinping frequently describes as changes unseen in a century. And this, I would say, is the real significance of the events that took place in China at the beginning of this month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keith, for that fantastic detail of the positive evolution of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the detail, but also for your detailed information regarding the fact that China not only desires multipolarity, is building the institutions where all countries can play a protagonic role, such as the BRICS, such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization itself, as well as the BRICS, the BRI. So it's quite important to understand that, and clearly the tectonic plates are moving. The fact that the United States organized aggression against India forced India to actually move in the right direction. And in that sense, your analogy of the channel is absolutely perfect. Finally, I think the question that you really indicated throughout your presentation is the United States organizing aggression, I would say war, against the rest of the world to stop multipolarity. That's really the purpose of it, because this is very dangerous things to East hegemony. Thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Jenny Clegg. She also doesn't need presentation, but I'm going to do one anyway. She's an author, peace activist, long-standing China specialist. She's an independent writer and researcher specializing in China's development and international role, and a former senior lecturer course leader in Asia Pacific Studies at the University of Central Lancashire, Preston in the UK. Her works include China's Global Strategy Towards a Multipolar World, Pluto Press 2009. Dr. Clegg regularly writes substantial analysis about China-related developments. Before I give the floor to her, as it was coming in, I discovered the latest book that she's done, which is this one, A Storm in the Heavens. Everybody should buy one of these copies. They are outside available, and you will be much wiser about China than you were before you read this book. Thank you very much. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you for that introduction, Francisco. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon on this panel. These days, I feel as if I'm in a really bad dream. This dream is full of F-35s and B-61 gravity bombs and AUKUS submarines, and the US has got a Department of War, and Britain will defend Taiwan, sending warships up the Taiwan Straits to prove its point, and Germany and Japan are reviving their military alliance of the past, and Britain is helping. I mean, is this for real? Is this serious? Am I dreaming? In May, I visited China. I visited the city of Chongqing, which is a truly awesome city of 30 million people. Along the banks of the Yangtze, the River Yangtze, there are high-rise buildings as far as the eye can see. It's becoming a hub in the high-quality productive forces, building EVs and robotics. It's always been a sort of center point for southwestern China, linking with the east coast down the Yangtze. But now there are high-speed rail links go all the way down into Indochina, reaching into link into Southeast Asia. And then they go up through Kazakhstan and across Russia all the way to Europe. And they're now building a middle spur, which is going to reach across into the Middle East. So you see this, and China's future is palpable. You come back here, and what have we got? Nuclear annihilation? So when did this nightmare become separated from reality? I'd say around 1945, 1946, when the US, with Britain, fabricated that they and they alone had saved the world from fascism. But it was China that at huge cost had resisted Japanese aggression for 14 years, and much of that time they did so without any help from the United States, without any help from the UK. They held down Japanese forces in China, and that constrained them from spilling over and making the fighting in the Pacific even more intense. It would have been much more difficult to win the war had the Chinese not done that, and also preventing the opening up of the Second Front against the Soviet Union. If that had happened, goodness knows where we'd be now. So when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and Hong Kong in 1941, Roosevelt and Churchill had to recognize China's contribution. And so China became our ally in the war and also became a founder member of the United Nations along the principles of equality of nations. But this transformative moment in the recognition of the equality of nations was not to be. After the war, the imperialist system was under challenge because, at least in Asia, world war had been a fight for liberation. And as the defeat of fascism gave way to surging movements of national independence, European colonial rule was crumbling. So imperialism had to restructure, and it had to restructure around a more indirect system of neocolonialism, with the US dominating the international space. It's really this myth of the World War victory was born in a virulent anti-communism and became the cornerstone of the US claim to world leadership, simultaneously cutting China out and sidelining the UN. Since 1949, China has worked to restore those 1945 principles of equality, both in terms of itself and in terms of the wider world, but also addressing the weakness of the foundation of the UN, which was, of course, the economic inequality and the imbalance between nations. It took China 20 years to gain UN recognition, 30 years to regain US recognition, albeit with caveats over Taiwan, over 40 years to establish diplomatic relations with all but a handful of countries. Then, from the 1990s, China began to build bilateral win-win partnerships, as well as forming regional groups such as the China-Africa Forum, the Forum with Latin American and Caribbean states, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and around 2010, China initiated the Belt and Road Initiative and helped to draw together the BRICS to further the agenda of economic rebalancing. Then in 2017, you might remember, Xi Jinping took the first step onto the world stage, choosing to appear at the Davos Forum, the premier gathering of political and big business leaders. And to this international capitalist class, Xi Jinping said effectively, yes, China is here now, and we're going to take a lead. And he proceeded to disconcert them with his call for a win-win globalization, building a shared future. Then came the series of initiatives, which I think other speakers have already mentioned, on global development, global security, civilization exchange, and just now, as Keith was talking about, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization Summit, in which Xi Jinping introduced the Global Governance Initiative. So on reflection over this period, we can see China building a new multilateralism step by step, a new system of international relations amongst equal states. The basis lies in uniting the global south, but this is not easy, given their different histories, political systems, levels of development, and so China creates these various forums and initiatives. So some countries can work together on development, some on security issues, some on regional cooperation, and so on. The Global Governance Initiative gives a new focus for all of these arrangements, all to come together in an overarching system. And we should be clear that China has never set out to build a socialist bloc. Bloc building for China is dangerously divisive. It has always sought to build unity, as in United Nations. Now, critics claim, for example, that the BRICS members all pull in different directions and can't achieve anything. But that is to miss the point, which is to develop a new way of doing things amongst equal states, committing to resolving tensions arising from differences through dialogue. And if countries commit to that, that means the end of war. Critics also mock China's initiatives as too vague to be meaningful. Take this recent Shanghai Cooperation Summit. which has seen to shift from a security focus, as Keith was explaining, it was aimed originally to counter terrorism in Central Asia, then bringing in others, notably Pakistan and India, but it's now widened to an economic agenda with the proposal for a development bank with the potential over time to reduce reliance on the dollar. Now, critics minimize the significance given the lack of specifics here, but let's consider how the summit included 7 out of 10 members of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and from Middle East and West Asia, it drew in Egypt and Turkey. Now factor in what I said about Chongqing and all of those linkages in the Eurasian area and the commitment to high tech, and add the summit aspirations to promote development in digitization and green development. And we see that even if the plans are vague, here is a material basis of a future world. Now, when I talk about the need to rebuild the UN these days, I get very funny looks from people, as if to say, don't I know the UN is a corpse in a state of serious decomposition. But I would contend that this building of multilateralism, step by step, as I've outlined, in this process lie the fruits of the real World War II victory, working through the decades towards a world without war. But just as China steps onto the world stage seeking some stability, it is charged with leading an axis of disruption. From the ignorance of Kaja Kallas, would you believe the EU foreign minister who was surprised that Russia and China should talk between them about winning World War II and defeating fascism. With her ignorance on the one hand, Starmer's effort to revive gunboat diplomacy, Trump's swagger, the reckless bombings of Iran and Qatar, all of these spawning, encouraging the worst forces of reaction, both domestically and internationally. These are clear signs of how great a danger we are in. And China could not be plainer. We have to think about our shared future, it is saying, because of what history tells us about our catastrophic shared past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Clegg, Jenny. As you can see from the explanations, peace has a huge, gigantic anti-imperialist potential. The United States is completely the enemy of peace now. It's not only because it sells weapons when there is war, but it's much more than that. It tried to stop economic processes that are going on. We know now that China is the main trading partner of over 150 countries. And it is through these institutions where countries can actually participate as equals, which is the key point. Participate as equals in order to engage in collaboration and cooperation that will benefit their own society. One thing I want to say regarding this, particularly the 80th anniversary of the defeat of fascism in China, the level of sophistication, military sophistication and political sophistication of the Chinese Communist Party in fighting Japanese when they were invading their country is absolutely superb. How can you maintain national unity when you actually put together landowners, peasants, and everybody else against the Japanese? If you squeeze the landowners too hard, they go to the Japanese side. If you don't squeeze them sufficiently, the peasants will abandon you. So to be able to liberate the zones in the rear guard of the Japanese invasion for years, building everything and making the life very difficult for the Japanese and actually helping the fight against fascism was absolutely essential. So the role of the Communist Party was central not only to defeat the Japanese, but also to build the new China that we know. So, our last but not the least speaker is my dear comrade Luke Daniels. He is the president of the Caribbean Labour Solidarity, chair of Islington Pensioners Forum. Luke Daniels is an social activist, counselor and consultant on domestic violence, who was born in Guyana, is a UK base and has worked internationally. His book, Pulling the Punches, Defeating Domestic Violence in 2014, was the first self-help guide for perpetrators, and his 2018 book, Defeating Domestic Violence in the Americas, Men's Work, I've read these two books myself, charts the region's history of violence from before Columbus and how it impacts on our societies today. He's a strong campaigner for reparations for African enslavement. Read his books. Look, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francisco. You're a good friend. I know we're talking about the end of fascism. It didn't feel like that 2 weeks ago, as I was nearly kettled in Whitehall with the anti-fascist group who had opposed the fascists who would come out on that day. There were some 140,000, some said 150,000, some put it a bit less, but it felt like a huge number, and it was scary for a lot of people. I managed to just escape being kettled because I heard a conversation from some of the police who were saying that they had lost their flanks, which meant that the fascists had broken through by Trafalgar Square, and I could see that we could be trapped in Whitehall. And I retreated with my comrades probably 15 minutes before they were captured in that corner. It's been a hot summer, and it's been a lot of activities fighting the fascists on the streets. So when I see...
I didn't understand that.
Shut up. That was my phone. That was my phone. Sorry about that. And yes, it didn't feel like, you know, the summer was really hot because I was involved with a lot of activities fighting fascism on the streets. They'd come to my backyard in Islington, 5 minutes walk from where I lived at Thistle Hotel, to try and antagonize the migrants and refugees who were staying at Thistle Hotel. We had to be called out about 3 times to defend those migrants against the fascists. We outnumbered them every time, I must say. We were determined that they would not come into Islington and have a good day. But then I got a call this morning that the hotel had been attacked on Wednesday night, someone wielding a knife and attempting to burn the hotel. They was arrested by the police. So the struggle continues, and we know the demonstration that we saw, many of you would have seen the thousands of flags all over the country. Rosebery Avenue, where I live, was littered in flags, and we know that this is a much financed operation. Fascism is very much alive and well and being financed by billionaires, as we heard about Bolsonaro. We've heard about Musk. We've seen him with its Nazi salute on Trump's parade. And so we're in great danger still in this country, especially that the 3 main political parties seem to be vying to outdo each other as who can be the most horrible to migrants and to refugees. And this is having an effect not only on people who are fleeing some horrible conditions for safety and coming to this country, but it's beginning to affect the people who were born in this country and people who've been living here for generations as racist attacks continue. People have been killed, people have been hurt, people have been insulted. We just heard of a girl, 9-year-old, being shot with an air gun pellet. People being stabbed. People being insulted on the trains. And so we have to be vigilant that fascism is not taking hold in this country, and we have to be out there fighting every second of the day. I think much of it is being fueled by Trump, and we saw from his victory what a nasty man he can be. He's determined to go after anybody who's ever insulted or not liked him or not being nice to him, as it were. And he's gone after black people and brown people from the global south, deporting thousands and tens of thousands. People are living in fear on the streets in America, and he seems determined that black people, wherever they are, will be frightened. He's told Starmer he should bring the troops out with the boats. They're fueling the fascists in Europe, and we in the Caribbean have been affected because many people have been deported, families destroyed. People are living in real terror in America. So when we talk about China and America, they shouldn't even be on the same page in terms of peace. We in the Caribbean have always supported a non-aligned movement. We've been strong supporters of the non-aligned movement. And now that Trump is actually trying to force Caribbean governments to make a choice, either you support China or you support America. And we heard Francisco about the case of Panama, and we know other governments are under pressure in the same way. Well, for me, it's a no-brainer as to which one to support. I started to draw up a list of the things about America that is so nasty. And I had to stop. It would have gone on for a long time, and I would be here sitting for a very long time talking to you. But I should mention some of them because, America was grounded and rooted in the genocide of the indigenous people, followed by hundreds of years of enslavement of Africans. They've done some nasty things in the time, and they continue. We know of what happened to George Floyd by the police killings and the Black Lives Movement that began as a result. And those attacks in some ways continue because the black people are being targeted in the US and outside of the US. And it is costing lives. The US threatens the sovereignty of every nation in the region. And we see recently the incursions and the attacks on Venezuela. We know of the embargo on Cuba. I won't go over the ground that many people have covered already, Nicaragua. I could go on forever. They've invaded so many countries and so many times over. They're hated in most places. Right now, the crisis in Haiti, they can't even show their face because of the many times they've occupied Haiti, spending up to 19 years one time, looting the gold from the bank, from the central bank, as they left on one occasion. And now they're looking for proxies to do the dirty work in Haiti, bringing in people from Kenya and looking to get Caribbean governments to cooperate with their agenda for Haiti. And I should remind people one of the only successful slave revolution in the world, and they continue to be punished for daring to free themselves. France had imposed reparations on them that they had to pay. France, to the tune, I think it was 20 billion at the time, which they only recently finished paying off. That's one of the demands that we in the Caribbean are making for reparations, not only for Haiti, but for the enslavement of Africans throughout the Caribbean, and Britain being one of the greatest beneficiaries of that period. We are making that demand that they apologize and they pay for reparations. But continuing with the, who would you support? This for trying to force Caribbean governments to support America or China. It's a no-brainer, as I said. They've come in with Latin American countries, as I said, several times over being invaded. They're still occupying areas of Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, which many of you would have heard about over, what has gone on in Afghanistan. they've invaded Little Grenada, and some of, on the pretext that Grenada somehow was a threat to American security. Now, if I remember correctly, Grenada has about 236,000 people or something like that. 260,000 people, somewhere in that region, Grenada. And somehow they are deemed a threat to American security. The threat was the example that they set. And in a very short time, that revolution had produced so much for the Grenadian people that it was an embarrassment to the United States. So they were determined to crush that example. And it's why, in some ways, China is enemy number one. The example that they are setting to the world in lifting people out of poverty, aiding countries with sustainable development, and especially in the Caribbean, building roads where roads have never been before, and other infrastructure to make people's lives a bit better in the region. In Guyana, the Americans also intervened in Guyana when we had a first, and I'm told the only Marxist government that was elected under Cheddi Jagan in Guyana. The Americans and British conspired to end that government. And then we had a dictatorship imposed on us for many years, and racial war was stirred up in Guyana, a situation that we're still dealing with today. So the legacy lives on about the intervention in Guyana and in Grenada. When we look at the number of military bases that America has throughout the world, and including the largest one in Colombia, we know who is for war and who is for peace. When they twist the arms of Europeans to spend on arms, and mainly American arms, they got to buy it from them, a lot of it, so make America great again. Let the Europeans and let the British pay for those arms. So when you weigh that up with also the zone of peace that we had declared in the Caribbean, which is America just ignores with these warships, and we understand nuclear submarines as well on the way in the region, despite complaints from the Caribbean and CARICOM countries. China, on the other hand, never enslaved our ancestors. They bring development and investment to the region with the road and belt, the future for the world with visions of peace and coexistence. And we heard of the solar panels that they assist many countries with. They're the manufacturing at great numbers. And we heard from the Venezuelan charge here about the mutual trust with which they were treated by the Chinese in their dealings. The USA has spent so much on arms and has invaded and done so much damage in the region. I'm sure that most of you will agree with me that if you were to weigh up whether China or America, who will win the vote? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke. Not too long ago, people who were organizing demonstrations in the streets in many cities in Europe were being banned, thrown into jail and so on for waving Palestinian flags. And now all these presidents and prime ministers actually have recognized Palestine themselves in one single go. The hypocrisy has no limit. Xenophobia pays off, particularly in the United States, because, and I'm glad that Luke raised that, particularly because they cannot fight on the real program that they have, which is total massive austerity at home and war abroad. That is really what is going on. And in order to ensure there is no dissent domestically, they label anybody who opposes them as terrorists, which empowers them legally to actually do whatever they want with them. That is the cocktail that the United States prepared to use and its military power to maintain its hegemony. I want to abuse my position as chair for 1 second, if I may, regarding Venezuela, because I'm the secretary of the Venezuela campaign. The reason for the military deployment is because the United States declared Venezuela to be a narco-state. According to the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, which produces a report every year, which is the most reliable in the world, which has got something like 300 pages, people like me read every time. According to them, 92% of the cocaine that is produced in Colombia goes to the United States via the Pacific. Venezuela has no coast in the Pacific, and only 5% or 8% tries to get through Venezuela. So there is no justification on earth for what they're doing, and it's part and parcel of the intention of the United States to maintain hegemony by destroying the country, that is the government that is opposing them to lay their filthy hands on the largest deposit of oil in the world. I'll finish with that. Thank you very much. Before you do anything, before you move, we're going to have a 10-minute break, which is going to be strictly 10 minutes. If anybody comes later than 10 minutes, we'll apply severe tariffs on all of them. Thank you.
Oh, definitely. We have connections with Brazil and others. These are Chinese, Venezuelan production center, which I'm impressed with. They're very good. There are now mechanics that one in Brazil. But Venezuelans are more. What's all about handling the landlords and so on. Yeah, that's what we do. Yeah. Very important point about how to handle contradictions. We have a blue and the left is everything is just. Anyway, that will happen.
think so.
Alex?
Just imagine this new fellow. Maybe you know, judging the gavel. Come on, sit down. I think you just need to make sure that your biography for Ali makes her young Ali. Young, always speaking young. Oh, no. Is that yes. Is that German for anything? I will absolutely tell you to shut up.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much for that idea, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you so much for that idea.
Bum, bum, bum. Oh, we're ready. Hello. Can people hear me? Yes. Yes. Oh no, it's gone off again. Turn it back on, please. Hello? Oh, we're kind of having some issues with the mic. Oops. Oh, people have gone quiet. And then has the mic... Can you still hear me? No. I'm just going to shout really loudly because this mic is quite temperamental. So can people hear me? Excellent. I'll just give... you know what? I'll just start because we're over time as it is. And we need to get through this panel. Oh, is it on? It's not. It's just like. It's fine. I'll just shout. It's fine. Hello? Nope. No. But it's okay. So whilst we intermittently try and get this mic to work, carry on. So thank you for coming to this afternoon panel that's called China's Achievements in Overcoming Poverty and Building Socialism. We have a distinguished panel of speakers to delve into that topic more deeply for 8 minutes each. Before I give them the floor, I will be just giving a 2-minute preamble of my own, which I will stick to time, don't worry. And this panel will finish on time, whatever happens. So the speakers will know about it. So without further ado, I'll just quickly go into my preamble. So in the story of modern global development, China's journey in overcoming poverty and building socialism with Chinese characteristics stands as a transformative chapter in modern global history. For decades, the country has pursued a unique model of development guided by the goal of creating a moderately prosperous society in all respects. And the starting point for China's development journey began when the onset of the Chinese Revolution and when the CPC was able to take over in leadership capacity. And its development began from a point of profound scarcity where so over half a century ago, this is when it happened, you had a country whose average annual income was over £100 a month. 88% of its population was living in extreme poverty, and other metrics such as life expectancy and literacy were amongst the lowest in the world. So since then, and under the CPC's leadership, through a sustained, targeted and nationwide campaign, China lifted 800 million people out of absolute poverty, which accounts for over 70% of global poverty reduction in that period. This was not an accidental outcome of economic growth. It was absolutely a meticulously organised top-down initiative by the CPC. So this success is deeply intertwined with China's path, thank you, of building socialism. The Chinese model combines state-led planning initiatives with market mechanisms, or combines those two. Major infrastructure projects such as the world's largest high-speed rail network, 5G network coverage, and urbanisation drives have been fundamental in connecting remote communities to economic opportunities. So the state, i.e., with the CPC, has played, not with the CPC, you know what I mean, has played a central role in directing investment, setting policy requirements, priorities rather, and mobilising resources on a massive scale. And ultimately, China frames this achievement not just as an economic success, but as a core requirement of socialism. It demonstrates a people-centred approach where the fruits of economic growth are shared with all, by all, with all, to ensure basic standard of living. And so this victory over absolute poverty is seen as a crucial foundation for the country's next national goal, which is the building of a modern socialist country by the middle of the century. So I'm going to open it up to the panel. The first person that I have to speak, to go into further into these topics is the Ali. Oh, did I introduce who I was? I can't remember if I introduced my name. Oh, yes, so apologies. My name is Rashida Islam, and I'm on the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee. So I'll just introduce the first speaker, which is Ali Al-Assam. He is the managing director of a what's called the New Social Cooperative, and he's also a member of the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee. So Ali, you have 8 minutes, and I will be very strict with the 8 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I spoke in this conference a year ago, and when I was speaking, actually, we heard the news that Sayyid Nasrallah was martyred exactly 20 minutes earlier. So Lebanon, the resistance movement, lost a great leader, a leader that may emerge only once every 1,000 years. So we salute Nasrallah, and we remember his achievement to the resistance movement in Lebanon and the Arabic and the Islamic world. So I'm going to speak about the comparison between two important AI strategic plans by the USA and China. I always say that AI is actually not only a revolution, it's a meta-revolution. All other revolutions are produced as part of it. So it's so important what happens to the global world in terms of the competition between the world, China, and between the USA and its allies in this world. So I'll go through the various slides, and thank you. So if you go to the next one, please. So of course I have only 12 minutes. I'll try to summarize this slide, which probably will be shared, has the bullet points of the main differences between the strategic plans. So I won't go into it now, but just go through the details. And if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so let's come to the American strategic plan. Trump, when announcing it in July this year, he said AI is a national security imperative for the United States to achieve and maintain and question and unchallenge global technological dominance. Right from the beginning, right from Trump's statement, AI to the United States is all about global dominance. And that comes up time and time again. So global dominance and security actually was mentioned 24 times in the AI strategic plan for the United States. It was the action plan was the product of Executive Order 14179 by Trump, and actually it was the brainchild of 2 experts only. It wasn't studied in a very big way. It was the brainchild of Trump's AI czar called David Sachs and the National Security Advisor, NSA. And it says the US wants to export its, so not only it's about national security and global dominance, in the plan it says that the US wants to export its full stack, hardware, models, applications, and standards to allies and allies only. It's not about benefiting the global world, it's about exporting and monopolizing what they think is a very key technology to its allies, which is the G7 countries only. And Trump's visit to the UK was about a week or 2 weeks ago, where he came up with his techno czars, talking about exporting the AI technology to the UK as one of the first examples of implementation of this policy. So next one, please. Okay, so if we talk in here, this is the essence of it. It's the USA plan is about unquestioned global dominance. The focus is military, security, global power. That's very clear in the plan, and the means is funding, R&D, alliances, and control. And if we contrast it with the China plan, if we go to the next slide, the China plan its main slogan is reshaping the paradigm of human production and life. National security was not mentioned once, or military was not mentioned once in the plan. It was all about people and about how it integrate with government, with industry, with lifestyle. I'll come to it in some more details. The focus in the Chinese plan was on economy, society, and daily life. Complete contrast between the USA plan and the China plan. The China plan was a directive from the State Council, the highest state body in China, and a huge variety of input from all corners of the Chinese state likely went into Chinese AI plan. As in contrast to the USA plan, it was from the bottom up. They spent months and years devising it. It's actually a continuation of the 2017 plan that was announced by Xi Jinping then. So it's really a continuation and a revisit and an upgrade of the 2017 plan. It's a very ambitious plan. And when they talk about reshaping the paradigm of human production and life, we socialists remember that the Marxist-Leninist ideological underpinnings eventually seems to imply AI integration might lead to China closer to the realization of full economic revolution and socialism. So it's very much part of the socialist view of how creating wealth to the whole society and prosperity can advance socialism. It's very much about people and people's lives, and in huge contrast to the USA plan. So if we go to the next slide, this shows, of course you can't see all the details in here, it shows the contrast between the USA plan and the China plan. So the USA, started by 2019 by another executive order by Trump when in his first presidency, and it talks in general terms about some milestones, while the Chinese one is much more detailed in what it does. Next one, please. So here this is the Chinese plan in more details, and you can see it started in 2017, and they want to go for full integration by 2020 and midpoint 2025, and then by 2026 in details, they want AI talent educational reform. Actually, it talks about 1 minute? Really? Oh, God. Can I have another 2 minutes? Okay, because the story is not complete. Yeah. Okay, so it talks about 70% of the country will have adopted AI-powered terminals, then talks going to 2019, 2035. Very detailed plan and very ambitious, really ambitious plan with full details. There is so much study that has gone into it, really. And it's all about core life. Next slide, please. Okay, when you talk about investment, you can see that USA investment, actually there is no real investment from the state. It's all old money when it comes to the USA. And it was about US government 40 billion, then the military are given the 25 billion, and then US private tech, they talk about 60 billion, and then that goes, where does it go in the US? Military and security, alliances and regulations, and commercial AI. While the Chinese plan, very well defined, goes into smart cities, industrial automation, social governance. That shows you the huge contrast between the US plan and the China. The China plan actually is part of what I call the fifth industrial revolution. There is a true industrial revolution in China that governs every aspect of life, and AI is a fundamental part. So it is a very, very ambitious and very important revolution. If we go to the next slide, in terms of regulation, there is no regulation whatsoever in the USA plan. The techno-feudals, I call them, or what Yanis called them, the big tech, are given free rein in achieving profit and using it for military. Military is a very big part of it, and using it, while the China, there is very careful governance in how AI could be used for the benefit of society. Next one, please. So these are our guys in here, the real leaders in the USA, and a strategy led by big tech, no regulation on AI, strive for huge profits with no basis in wealth creation, and unsustainable vertical control. If we go to the next one, just 1 minute, please. Okay. So in terms, if we look at the risk of the USA plan, it is very doubtful to succeed for a variety of reasons, and I don't have the time to do it. It's really, when you consider the risk by all specialists, it is very unlikely that the USA plan will succeed. To do with constraint on energy, they don't even have the infrastructure for the energy needed now. For example, OpenAI just announced a $400 billion plan to build six data centers in the USA, which will consume the equivalence of 10 nuclear power stations, which does not exist. They have not the infrastructure for it, is bound to fail, and there is any foundation for how can they sustain the profits to make for this 400 billion if it actually happens. So it is built on sand, actually, the USA plan. And if we go to the next one, well, the Chinese one, which is very detailed, it's all about society. It's very well studied, and it's really a great revolution, which I'm fully confident, knowing the data that will succeed. If we go to the next one, please. Now, the Chinese Global AI Initiative, which my colleagues talked about in various sessions, now replaced with, upgraded only yesterday. Keith sent me the information about it. They call it the AI Plus for Humanity. And it has, if you go next one, it has 4 sections, very well detailed. This is for humanity, not for China. AI industrial application, cultural prosperity, technological advantage, public well-being, and industrial application. So China is very determined that the fruits of its AI revolution is spread through open sources and everything to the whole world. Okay, and finally, AI, nearly finally, just 1 second. AI can be used for harm, and as we can see, and is going to be used for harm by US companies. They invested $100 billion in Israel's security industry. AI is being used for the genocide in Gaza, while AI could be for good. So there's the whole contrast between them. And finally, really, it's up to the global world how AI will be used. Would it be used for liberation or to sell the empire? And my prediction is that the USA plan, which has no foundation, is bound to failure, and that has a huge consequences for the world, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Ali, for sticking to time. Just before in the interest of fairness, I'll give the subsequent speakers 10 minutes each to speak. But before I take us to the next speaker, I just wanted to communicate a message from George Galloway's camp. Apparently, he has been arrested at the airport, which is why he wasn't present at the first session today. So no details so far have been provided. We can only assume it was politically motivated. So all we can do is just basically send our solidarity to him in terms of resisting the efforts of the British state. Just without further ado, I'll take us to our next speaker, who is the Education Officer for the Young Communist League. Eben Williams, please give him a warm welcome.
Thanks. First of all, I just massive thank you to Carlos and Keith and all of the team at Friends of Socialist China. Last year's PRC 75 event was so professional and well done, and it's really exciting to see that this is going to be an annual conference. It's so important today that we're building this kind of united front against imperialism in all of its forms, which is represented today by all of the different political parties and organizations in this room, and that's not easy to do, is bringing the left together. So congratulations to Carlos and Keith and everyone else. So in my day job, I'm a Chinese translator, and it just so happened that when I was invited to speak on this panel about the construction of Chinese socialism and eliminating poverty, that I was actually translating an article by a Chinese academic at the Institute of Chinese Marxism in Shanghai for Iskra Books, who have a fantastic journal called Peaceland Bread. I think it's sold out, unfortunately, but this will hopefully be appearing in a later edition next year. It was very interesting. I'm just going to read a passage from it until I go over time, and then I'll stop. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. Theoretically speaking, socialism is not being constructed in China on the exact same basis envisioned by Marx and Engels and fully expanded upon in Capital. Instead, it has been reached directly under conditions where capitalism has not fully developed, where political power was seized through revolution at the appropriate historical moment, and where the Cordine forks of the capitalist system was leapt across, with Cordine forks being the term Marx used to describe the problem of a potential future socialist society attempting to skip over the capitalist stage after a proletarian revolution, in his prophetic wisdom. At first, this form of socialism could not have even qualified as the lower stage of communism, and this determined the relatively long period of time which China would have to spend under this socialist system in order to complete its historical mission and achieve the modernization which should have already been completed during a capitalist stage, and during which it would gradually close the gap in development with the advanced nations of the world. This stage is the so-called primary stage of socialism, and this is what the article is all about, and it goes into some fantastic detail about how this theory developed and where it's taking us into the future. Facts have repeatedly shown that for a relatively economically and culturally backward country like China, there is still a long way to go from first establishing the socialist system to building socialism itself. Likewise, it has been a relatively long process for successive generations of Chinese Communist Party leaders to develop their own understanding toward this question. After the establishment of the new China, and particularly around the 8th Communist Party of China National Congress, Communist Party members had a sober awareness of the historical position which they found themselves in, and made a deliberate attempt to shatter any superstitions about the need to follow the Soviet model of socialism dogmatically. But faced with a harsh and complex external situation, the CPC made the mistake of being too eager for results and was unable to successfully maintain the correct path going forward, leading to serious setbacks to the construction of socialism in China, despite some major achievements at the same time. Facing the convoluted road to socialist construction in China, as well as lessons from the international communist movement of those who had tried to surpass their current stage of social development too early, the CPC has gradually put forward its theory of the primary stage of socialism. On the basis of analyzing the concrete national conditions of China, the 13th National Congress clarified its basic understanding of the theory of this stage, stating that the primary stage of socialism does not refer to an initial stage that every country will go through upon entering socialism generally, but refers to the particular stage that China must go through when constructing socialism under the conditions of backward productive forces and an underdeveloped commodity economy. The primary stage of socialism will stretch at least 100 years, dating back to the 1950s, when the socialist transformation of private ownership of the means of production was basically completed, to the time around the mid-21st century, I think it was this 2049 deadline, when socialist modernization will have been in the main accomplished. During this stage, the principal contradiction in society, and the wording for this has developed over time, and that's interesting in of itself, but originally it was formulated as the contradiction between the ever-growing material and cultural needs of the people and backward social production. Class struggle will continue to exist to a certain degree for a long period of time, but it is not at the moment the principal contradiction. To resolve the principal contradiction of the current stage, the primary task is to energetically expand the commodity economy, raise labor productivity, and gradually achieve modernization of industry, agriculture, national defense, science, and technology. To this end, reform must be conducted where the links of production and superstructures are incompatible with the growth of the productive forces. Modernization is a necessary trend of human social development, as well as the shared aspiration of multiple generations of Chinese Communist Party members, except that the modernization pursued by the Communist Party of China is socialist modernization. And the reason for emphasizing that it is a socialism with Chinese characteristics is that the primary stage of socialism which China currently finds itself in is not a stage of socialism in the traditional sense as understood by Marx. According to Marx and Engels, socialism should naturally develop as a new social formation when the capitalist relations of production can no longer accommodate their own productive forces after capitalism is fully developed and modernization has been achieved. And yet, all existing socialist countries, including China, have been established under conditions where capitalism has not been fully developed and modernization has not been achieved, where political power has been seized through violent revolution, and then, under the guarantee of the socialist regime, the socialist transformation of the private ownership of the means of production has been realized, thereby establishing the socialist system while leaping across the chord. So prior to reform and opening up, the Communist Party of China put undue emphasis on the degree of public ownership of the means of production and ended up taking a wrong course and committing the error of attempting to skip over China's current stage of social development too early. But since reform and opening up, the CPC has liberated its thinking and sought truth from facts, upholding reform internally and opening up to the outside world, eliminating institutions and mechanisms which hinder the development of the productive forces of society, thereby achieving the great leap of the Chinese nation from standing up to growing rich. However, at the same time, the difference between socialism and capitalism has been to a certain extent concealed under the banner of modernization, and a series of problems and phenomena that are clearly contrary to socialist principles had also emerged in society. But since the new era, the Central Committee of the CPC, with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, has always emphasized the socialist nature of the Chinese road, continuing to follow the basic principles and core values of socialism in drawing up the blueprint for China's modernization drive, and always inserting socialist elements into modernization, leading the way to building a great modern socialist country in all respects, and striving to promote an organic unity between socialism and modernization. During the new era and the new stage of development, when the strategic goals of the two-step strategy for development have been completed, one after another, and a great modern socialist country has been built, this will signify the completion of the primary stage of socialism, thereby starting the advance to a higher stage of socialism. By then, China will not only have achieved unity between socialism and modernization, solving the problems that Marx, Engels, and even Lenin failed to systematically answer, and that no subsequent socialist countries have provided scientific answers to, but will also have unified the two major tasks of socialist modernization and the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, solving the problem of the relationship between the international and the national in the socialist movement. The implications of this are not only to provide another option for the path to modernization for the vast number of developing countries, including other socialist countries, but also to present a new solution to the problems of modernity for developed capitalist countries like ours, that is, the socialist road out. So that's just a bit of a taster, but you can see the full article in a later edition of Peacetime Bread. Please check it out, and please support Iskra Books because they do fantastic work.
Thank you. Thanks for that theoretical overview, Eben. So really helpful to understand what's going on in China. I forgot to do a preamble Ali. Oh, well, I'll do it in a bit. Sorry. Our next speaker, they'll be our final speaker because we did have another panelist lined up, but for undisclosed reasons, he hasn't been able to attend today's session, so that's Roger Mackenzie. So our final but no means our least speaker is Fiona Sim, who is the co-founder of the Black Liberation Alliance, who's also a Friends of Socialist China Britain committee member, and yeah, a stalwart trade unionist as well. So yeah, 10 minutes, Fiona. Do you want to? Oh yeah, give them a warm welcome.
Hopefully this is working. Beautiful. Thanks, Rashida, for the warm introduction. I'm so glad to be here on this panel. Again, like a year on from the 75th anniversary celebrations, which I believe was also with Ebed on the same panel. So I'm getting a bit of deja vu. So as many of my comrades here today have spoken on the various panels, I don't think China's poverty alleviation efforts and achievements can be overstated enough. Just the very fact that, you know, it has contributed to 70% of the global poverty decline has meant that the global poverty rates have been seen to decline, but without China's contributions, global poverty in particular, would be on the ever increase. And I think it's important for us to situate China's mammoth achievements in how they've managed to do this on a local level. So I'm very lucky to have a comrade called Miriam, who is the fellow committee member of the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee, and also my fellow co-founder of the Black Liberation Alliance, because she's recently returned from her delegation at the 9th Africa-China Youth Festival. Luckily for me, she isn't here to tell the tale, so I've been able to steal it. But as part of her delegation, she got to visit the province of Qinghai in the northwest of China, and it's an area that's remote and quite mountainous in its environment, and it also includes the Tibetan Xizang plains. So she was able to witness firsthand the ongoing impact of poverty alleviation programs that were established somewhat years ago, and see the fruits of the labor, essentially, of the local people, the local officials, and just the collaborative efforts to make it is what it is today. So in Qinghai, the poverty alleviation program has taken many forms, such as building key infrastructure, such as schools, hospitals, roads. It's included investment in industrial and agricultural development, and was also included the establishment of cooperatives to connect local farmers to markets. So it's all being done on the basis of the material conditions of the local area, in which a lot of the local villages suffer from being cut off from, you know, the rest of the urban centers in China, because there are many, many villages and they're all quite isolated from each other. The terrain is very rocky. It's very difficult to grow fruit and vegetables. It's difficult to raise livestock because of course, the land isn't as arable as in other areas of China. And where these things were too big of a factor and it wasn't quite possible to build the infrastructure, the poverty alleviation program included the relocation of people from areas with poor infrastructure and no access to things like water and clinics. And yeah, the entire village would be relocated to another county. So one such example she visited was the Tiezha village, which was relocated to Gonghe County. And the most significant project in this county in particular was bringing clean green energy to the region. And it now hosts the largest photovoltaic solar power plant in the whole world. And this, of course, has brought solar power as an industry to villages in Qinghai, a means of generating power, feeding into the national energy grid in China itself, and of course generating income for many families who wouldn't have access to electricity of this nature otherwise. But its success is actually down to an unsuspecting and quite an unusual source. It's actually down to sheep, what they call photovoltaic sheep. So you see, when the solar panels were first installed in the area, it was in the sea of vast desert land, inarable land, and installing the plants there risked intense sand erosion, damage from the environmental factors, natural disasters, you name it. So to combat this, what they did was, at the base of the solar panels, they planted grass seeds, so to encourage vegetation to grow there to prevent the sand erosion. And to everyone's surprise, the grass actually thrived there, and it turned the power plant parks into like literally a sea of green. Like no one thought this would happen. They just thought they'd get, you know, a few weeds, a few bits of grass here and there to help protect. But actually, it was almost too successful. So it brought a new challenge. Like, how do we maintain this? How do we stop the grass from overgrowing between the panels and interfering with the efficiency of the solar panels? How do we prevent overgrowth from creating dry hotspots that could actually create new problems like wildfires in the summer? And so the local people, the local engineers, the local officials, they deliberated on this problem for months. And they decided in the end, instead of relying on pesticides and other environmentally damaging methods to get rid of the grass or to curb the grass's growth, they wanted to turn to, you know, the local elements, the local natural organic elements. They turned to sheep. They got the local farmers and their sheep to come along to essentially mow the grass, the lawn mowers of these gigantic solar power plants. And the sheep would literally just munch their way around the power plant farms, eating away all the grass, keeping it nice and clean and trimmed so it wouldn't interfere with the solar panels. And it was a way so farmers, local farmers, could then feed their sheep at no extra cost to them. And in fact, it saved them the stress of having to find new pasture to bring their stock to graze. And it's a difficult feat in these desert lands. So actually, a lot of farmers' sheep would end up dying of starvation, of lack of hydration. So this brought a whole new solution to a problem that they hadn't even necessarily considered when they were building this power plant park. And of course, at the other side, the power plant would benefit from the perks of being able to be naturally maintained at actually much, much lower costs than having to, you know, get industrial-sized lawn mowers and maintenance and pesticides in. And so a new business bloomed out of this, the photovoltaic sheep business. And new farmers would be able to go to these photovoltaic farms and eat away at all the grass. And it's literally as simple as that. And this landmark project generated a combined income of 67 million yuan across 173 previously poverty-stricken villages. And it brought in an additional approximately 675 yuan per person, per sheep, for over 53,000 local people. So we can see here, this is just one example of how lifting people out of poverty is not at odds with building a greener, cleaner, and more sustainable world. And this is the socialism that China is building, one in which the land and its people can work in harmony to bring common to the people, to the masses. But let's be clear about this. This project and all the projects that form the poverty alleviation program are not just due to magic wands being waved, not just due to
yeah, it's still gradually slipping.
It gradually goes down like that.
So, counterweight it, and then extend it here. Oh, erectile dysfunction, got it, yeah. That's fine. We'll cancel you later. We'll let you speak first. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
And in general.
That's fine, Okay.
Yep.
And you want to leave some slack.
Is this close enough then?
I think so. And it's better to put it directly in front?
That's what
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. If you could just not move side by side.
I'll try.
Yeah. And tell the others and punish them if they do.
Hi everyone, if we could sit back down when you have a chance.
Okay, my gosh. Yeah, okay. My gosh. Yeah.
One of us can say,
I can say it.
that this has happened. And
Yeah.
We condemn, you know,
Yeah.
this sort of increasingly repressive crackdown on predominantly.
Was it Gatwick? Yeah.
Presumably solidarity with Palestine and opposition to genocide.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi everyone, if you could please sit back down, thank you. We're going to get started. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for staying with us, and the topic of this session is going to be on how China is leading the fight against climate breakdown. Just before that, some information we've received. Unfortunately, we've heard that George Galloway was recently detained under the Terrorism Act coming into Gatwick, and that's why he wasn't able to make today's meeting. This is shocking news, but not surprising given the fascist turn we're seeing in this country and the repression, the political repression that's being laid out against everyone. Presumably this is to do with George Galloway's Palestine solidarity, and obviously we oppose this fascist act and send our solidarity to George and his family. So as mentioned, the topic of this one is, sorry, it's cutting out. Can you hear me? The topic of this one is China is leading the fight against climate breakdown. It's possibly one of the lesser controversial topics concerning China. Even people who don't normally consider themselves friends of China, the mainstream press, are recognizing the enormous contributions that China is making. They can't deny, reality. Every week we're hit by statistics which are, truly staggering and show both the scale of China's ambition and, more importantly, what it's able to achieve. Just a couple of examples of those statistics. In 2025, China built 80% of the world's solar panels, 60% of the world's wind turbines, 70% of electric vehicles, 75% of batteries. It installs more green energy than the rest of the world combined. In the first 5 months of this year, it's installed, around 250 gigawatts of energy, which is equivalent to entire countries like Indonesia or Turkey. In recent years, this year or last year, it's been observed that China's CO2 emissions may have peaked, which was 5 years ahead of the planned targets for that achievement. The reason China is able to achieve these incredible successes when more developed countries are unable to is due to the centralized leadership of the Communist Party of China and their economic control, fundamentally. This enables rational, long-term planning, and as I mentioned, these things are often completed ahead of schedule. Chinese President Xi Jinping has some prominent policies and concepts: the ecological civilization and the clear waters and green mountains, which push these policies and actions forwards. We don't really need to spend too much time comparing with this country. We certainly don't have clear waters in our country. And in America, the chaotic political system means there's constant flopping in terms of environmental policy, not that they've ever been particularly enthusiastic about it. And China is now exporting this qualitative shift in energy globally in the way that they are also changing and solidifying the global institutions for diplomacy, governance, finance, and others. Now, in the ecological infrastructure, they're building an alternative to the Western destructive system. One of these methods is the Belt and Road Initiative, and the announcements in recent years of a rejection of coal power plants involved with the Belt and Road Initiative is truly world-changing. These improved tech in solar, wind, nuclear, and other green industries allow for Global South nations and developing nations to pursue more viable, sustainable development paths. It's a kind of leapfrogging of tech. In some countries, they skipped from landlines and just started with mobile phones, and now we're seeing in developing nations that they can skip fossil infrastructure and move straight ahead to green industries. And China's model supports this with equitable financing and win-win partnerships in terms of their diplomatic approach. And even, as I mentioned, somewhere like the New York Times, which is not considered any friend of China, recently wrote an article about wind farms being built in Laos. And they said, where American bombs once fell, Chinese wind turbines now rise, which just encapsulates the whole differing approach. And we should be recognizing the importance of this in terms of geopolitics. Green infrastructure is more resilient in terms of imperialist encirclement and also natural disasters. So by building this kind of infrastructure, it allows sovereign nations to resist imperialist aggression. And we've seen this in the case of China rebuilding Cuba's energy infrastructure, which also helps it in terms of the frequent tropical cyclones and so on that affect it. And when you consider that China has exported green tech to 191 out of the 192 UN member states in the last year, it shows the extent of this geopolitical shift. So to learn more about this world historic transformation, we've got some excellent speakers who will go deeper into these questions. So I should have introduced myself as well. My name is David Peet. I'm the secretary with the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee and also an editor with Iskra Books. You can come and talk to me upstairs later on. On the panel today, we also have Carlos Martinez, who is an author and a co-editor of Friends of Socialist China, Paul Atkin, who is a political analyst and environmental campaigner, and Yanan Song, who is a professor in global politics at SOAS. So first, Paul.
Surrender. Okay. I should explain, I edit the Greener Jobs Alliance newsletter and convene the National Education Union Climate Change Network. But I'm speaking in a personal capacity because both those organisations contain quite wide views on China. This is my view. China's response to the climate crisis aims to build a moderately prosperous socialist society as an ecological civilization. The connection between the two is expressed in the two mountains proposition popularised by Xi Jinping, that green mountains with clear water are as valuable as mountains of gold and silver. So as China grows, it will grow greener. So it's not socialism with green bits, let alone a Khrushchevite vision of the conquest of nature, but green socialism. And the socialism is essential to China installed more solar power than Australia has in its entire history at a rate equivalent to a conventional power station every 8 minutes. They're building, as Fiona said, they're building these enormous solar and wind farms in arid parts of the Western Indies, 6% in the first half of this year. That's vital because China's emissions are 30% of the global total, and if they get it wrong, we're all in trouble. China now has 57% of its electricity generated by renewables, compared to just over 50% the dropped by 2.6% in the first half of this year, even as the economy grew by 5%. Showing that the shift in reliance is picking up pace. Global impact. Although there are a few residual projects, China's decision to abandon coal investment overseas has been pivotal, and now more than 60% of emerging and developing economies are leapfrogging the US and Europe in clean electrification, thanks mostly to China's exports of cheap solar panels. Pakistan last year added as much capacity in rooftop solar as they'd previously been able to generate from their entire grid. This is now being picked up in parts of Africa, with solar panel exports from China up 60% this year. This is from a low base, but the potential is enormous. In countries like Kenya, Morocco, Algeria, Ethiopia, the DRC, Botswana, Zambia, Nigeria and South Africa, solar imports have grown this year by factors of between 3 to 8. Outside Africa, countries like Brazil and Vietnam, the adoption of solar, wind and battery storage is outpacing not only fossil fuels, but also the business as usual strategies of many rich countries, let alone the delirious reactionary stance of the United States. China's clean energy exports in 2024 alone shaved 1% off global emissions outside of China, according to Carbon Brief, and this will accelerate during the next 30 years. Reuters reports that 87% of power generation investment in emerging economies in China flowed into clean energy in 2024, and that means that 3/4 of global fossil fuel demand is now in nations that have already peaked. 3 factors underline this, and these are quotes from Reuters, so not from a source the right-wing press here would call eco-fanatic. One is physics. Fossil fuels are wasteful, 2/3 of the energy in coal, oil or gas is lost to heat or inefficiency. Solar, electric motors and heat pumps are 2 to 4 times as efficient. So we can do a lot more with a lot less at lower cost. This is expressed very well in this graphic. I'm sorry, it's very small. But it says solar panels carried by one container ship, that's that little one there, can generate as much electricity as 100 container ships of coal or 50 container ships of liquefied natural gas. Second is economics. Fossil fuels are commodities built on extraction. As reserves deplete, it gets more expensive to access what's left. Look at the North Sea. Electro-based technology is manufactured, so the more that gets built, the cheaper and better it becomes. On average, costs fall by around 20% every time deployment doubles. Most of the world, solar and wind are now the lowest cost new power. Investment follows. Today, 2/3 of global energy capital flows into electrotech, while oil majors are investing more in stock buybacks than in new wells. Third, geopolitics. The old energy system left 3/4 of humanity dependent on expensive imported fuels. Electro-based technologies unlock local resources. Almost all countries have enough sun and wind to meet their energy needs many times over. And what this means is that the Western model of development is neither available nor needed for the majority of the world. Thanks to China's investment in renewables, they can modernise in their own way, and that means that the future does not and cannot look like the United States. And to elaborate on that last point, China is leading on climate because it is not doing what the US is doing, nor following it in a race to the bottom. Ma Xiaozhu, China's Vice Foreign Minister, says, regardless of how the international situation evolves, China's proactive actions to address climate change will not slow down. As we know, the Trump administration is locking the US into a suicidal entrenchment in increasingly outmoded fossil fuel technology. In rolling back Biden's attempt to suck green investment into the US, Trump has, as many commentators have noted, abandoned the future. This doesn't simply involve domestic economic self-sabotage with more expensive fossil fuel plants kept running and pushing up bills, offshore wind farms cancelled, imperiling supply in regions like New England, but also a completely reckless wrecking ball taken to disaster emergency relief and any state scientific or academic research related to the climate and the impacts of it. So US academics at international conferences have taken to using burner phones. That means that US policy is based on a set of lies about climate change and actively has to suppress the truth about it. Part of Trump's trade offensive has been to get the US's subordinate allies to buy its exports of LNG, whether they need it or not. And some of this involves fantasy figures, and the US-UK nuclear deal is similarly fanciful. They're aiming beyond the capacity of their own system. But the purpose of it is to lock as much of the world as possible into fossil fuel bondage, US global energy dominance. And that's why the increasingly shrill arguments coming from those overt political subordinates of the US, reform here, with the incredible shrinking Conservative Party yapping along in their wake, with an increasingly panicky right-wing press in full sneering support, are actually aiming at consolidating UK energy dependence on the US. Given the factors outlined above, a success for the US would lock the world and the US itself into climate collapse, the sort of scenario outlined by one of their own think tanks in 2008 as a situation in which, quote, countries with resources themselves would have to engage in nightmarish episodes of triage, deciding who and what can be salvaged from a disordered environment. The choices would primarily have to be made among the poor at home and abroad, something that is in all of our interest to avoid. But while the US still makes some of the weather, literally in this case, it's no longer able to determine the direction of the world, and Trump is increasingly standing on thin ice that's getting thinner as the ice caps melt. As Bill McKibben puts it in his optimistic article, Here Comes the Sun, cue George Harrison track, Big Oil spent more money on last year's election cycle in my country than they've ever done before. And that's why they're now being rewarded with a whole variety of measures designed to slow this transition down, which may succeed. I mean, it's possible that 20 years from now, America will be a kind of museum of internal combustion that other people will visit to see what the olden days were like. But it's not going to slow down the rest of the world much, I don't think. There's obviously a tension in the UK government with its attempts to dodge tariffs by bending the knee and crippling any possibility of positive investment by committing to an annual £77 billion black hole on defence spending, and the stated direction of the Department of Energy Security Net Zero to make the UK an electro-state, which involves some cooperation with China and would require more investment than the military spend will allow. As this crisis unfolds and deepens, the cost of being shackled to the US and the Cold War stance it requires against China will become more and more apparent, and a more live debate in the climate movement, and something we need to inject into mainstream politics in and through the unions, Labour, the Greens and your party. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul, for that excellent contribution, and yeah, pointing out the importance of the connection between socialism and green development. You know, the Chinese believe you can't have socialism without prosperity, and you can't have prosperity without a viable ecosystem. So our next speaker is Yanan Song. Thanks again for inviting me to this conference. I am an academic. I work in university, so this is obviously my very first taste of such a conference with so many activists. I'm particularly impressed by how many of you, although not Chinese, show great respect for China's achievements and contributions. As a Chinese, I feel very grateful. Thank you so much. Let me get on to business quickly. Given the title of today's panel, what I'm going to do is to share with you some of my understanding of how China has transformed into a global climate leader. To be very honest, I'm not a specialist in the field of climate change. My academic background is in international relations, but in IR, climate change is still regarded as a very important but new emerging pattern. So I'll try to use this platform to have a kind of a fruitful exchange of ideas and thoughts. So when we think of climate change, it is pretty clear that China is already at the very heart of the story. For example, with over 30% of the global carbon dioxide emissions in 2022, China is regarded as the world's largest emitter. But at the same time, it is also increasingly the world's largest global climate actor. So to understand whether humanity succeeds or fails in this climate fight, it will be very interesting and important for us to know how China has moved from a cautious participant to a central leader in its global climate governance. Well, in the early 1990s, China joined the UN climate process with great caution. At that time, it basically insisted on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. The reason behind it was pretty straightforward. It mainly wanted to protect its own right to develop, while at the same time reminding the world that those rich countries had caused most of the problem. But over the past 3 decades, China has already transformed. What actually began as a defensive diplomacy eventually became a kind of proactive climate leadership. And this leadership is expressed in 2 important ways. One is through domestic actions. The other is through international diplomacy. Well, domestically, China has already made or taken many important and remarkable steps in the past years, and I'm sure we've already talked about a lot in today's panels. We've got some very specific, impressive figures, data to share. For instance, let me remind you that, for instance, in the year of 2024, China added around 357 gigawatts of the new wind and solar capacity, which is actually more than the entire renewable capacity of most regions in the world. So very astonishing. And also in the early 2025, early part 2025, for the very first time, China's combined solar and wind capacity surpassed its thermal power capacity.
And this will absolutely be a kind of symbolic turning point in the global energy mix. And more importantly, China also cut its energy intensity per unit of GDP by 3.8%, beating its target, and will also reduce its carbon intensity by 3.4%. And today, in 2025, almost half of the climate experts in the world already believed that China's emissions reached its peak or will do so by 2025. You know, China set its target as the year of 2030. So as you can see, those numbers are clearly not of a laggard. Those are the numbers of a country that is leading clean energy transition. Well, in addition to those remarkable domestic actions I've just explained, internationally, China has also been very decisive. Recall of knowledge that actually back to the year of 2009 at Copenhagen, China was then criticized as an obstacle. But by 2000 Paris, China already became a torchbearer. It worked alongside with differently. China doesn't seek to become a hegemon in a global climate governance. Instead,